Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud World. My name is Santiago. So following up on the work that we have been doing with Azure Functions, today we will start making a hands-on. In this case today, we are going to be continuing working on the solution that we had set up previously for the other projects. And in this case, we will be using the Azure CLI and the Func CLI in order to create an Azure function. We are going to explore the different options that we have available to execute those, create them, and see the different templates that we have available. We are going to deploy it to the Azure portal and retest those functions. So on today's demo, we'll be going pretty simple. We will be developing initially a HTTP trigger. So this is going to give us the basic concept for the next videos to work in more advanced use cases and scenarios, like for example, consuming messages from a service queue or topic. So let's get started. So the Azure functions actually have the unique CLI in order to work with them. I'm going to drop you the link into the description in case you hadn't set up this local environment, but it's actually pretty easy to install. Whatever you are working with, Linux, Windows or Mac OS, it's actually pretty simple. So for that, we will be using the func command. This is going to provide us all the basic operations that we need in order to create Azure functions. So as you can see, we will have the basic capabilities to create a new Azure function project. We will be able to create new functions inside that particular project as well. And we also have the capabilities to run it locally. And also there are some advanced extensions which give us leverage to deploy the Azure function into different contexts. So for example, you can deploy directly through Azure to an Azure function, which is the standard deployment. You can deploy it as part of the container app. You can deploy a durable function. This is another extension of the Azure functions. Well, we have several cases like Kubernetes, setting up settings using different templates and so on. So for today, we'll be focusing mostly on only creating the solution, creating the most basic template, and deploy that to the Azure side. So in order to start, the first command that we need to get familiar with, it will be the init command. Here is actually pretty important to remember and to understand that the Azure function is a group of several functions. So when you hear someone talking about an Azure function, I want you not only to think like a single item, but it could be several items. As an example, a single Azure function in the Azure portal could contain 5 HTTP triggers, 2 service bus queue, 3 Cosmos DB triggers, and so on. So it's important to understand that the function apps could contain several functions inside of them. So the first thing that we need to do is to initialize this container, which is done with the init command. So for that, we will be using the init command. We need to provide the name of the project or the solution that we would like to work on, and we need to also to specify the runtime that we would like to use for our solution. The worker runtime is actually which programming language and framework you would like to use. So you can choose like different frameworks like Java, Python, and Rust and other languages, but in this case today we will be using .NET. So let's execute this command, and this is going to create all the boilerplate code for us. So the first thing that we need to choose from is the programming language that we would like to use, and also to confirm the type of runtime that we would like to use. In this case, we will be using an isolated worker model for our deployment model. Of course, we will be using C# as our programming language. And as you can see, using the func tooling makes things pretty simple, because it's going to give you a couple of options and I think that you can easily choose from just by using the terminal. So you don't have to provide everything throughout the CLI, but you can use the assistant in order to create whatever resources you need to for your Azure function. So now the process has been completed, we can explore a little bit what we have in our new folder. So if I do an ls, we will see that we have a new folder, in this case the cloudworld.functions, and say let's take a sneak peek what we have in this folder. So as you can see, we have very simple objects that have been created already for us. So we have the CS_proc, which is the representation of the project itself. We have the host JSON that we spoke previously, and we have a program.cs, which is going to be the entry point to make basic configuration like login, dependency injection, and different things. So let's move into Rider just to explore this in a more programmatic and visual view, so we can understand everything that we have. So now I imported manually the project to my solution already, but as you can see, we have the same structure in here. So as I was saying, we have in the program.cs very basic configuration like app insights, and just executing the main console application, which is going to be the entry point for the function apps. In here I can set up dependency injection and add any external dependencies that I need to, just to complete the work my Azure function is going to require. Remember, this entry point is going to be shared for all the functions that you define inside your solution. So keep that in mind. It's going to be fully shareable and actually accessible by everyone. Okay, so now let's go back into the CLI. And in this case, we will be creating the first function inside our function app solution. Just make sure that you are in the right folder, in this case the function folder, before moving to the next step. So now we are going to be using the func new, and in this case we only need to provide manually the name. We can provide some extra parameters throughout this function, like the type of function that we like to create and other things, but let's keep it pretty simple so we can see the different options that we have throughout the assistant. So the first thing is that we are going to be asked which type of trigger we would like to use for our Azure function. So if you saw the last video, I mentioned that the trigger inputs and outputs are actually three particular important pieces for an Azure function. So the trigger is going to be that what is going to cause your Azure function to be executed. So for example, if you set up a queue trigger, this is going to use the queues from the storage account service to trigger the function when a new item is added to the queue. Or for example, for the same service, you can trigger an Azure function when a new blob is added to the storage account, or even to a particular container you would like to isolate things. And we will have a lot of coverage for Service Bus, Event Hub, Cosmos DB, Dapper as well. And a time trigger, which as the name suggests, is going to be a cron job that is going to be executed according to the configuration that we give it to. In this case, we are going to be following up HTTP trigger. Now that the trigger has been created, let's go back into the IE and let's take a look what we have new. So as you can see, as part of the configuration, we have a new function in here. In this case, is the HTTP function. So this is actually pretty simple. It is nothing like pretty complicated, but let's explore a couple of the things that are pretty important in this Azure function. So the first thing is that the type of trigger that we are defining, in this case, is HTTP trigger. And this particular trigger takes at least two options for his configuration. The first thing is which type of authentication we would like to use. And when created Azure function, we have several capabilities to provide authentication. So for example, when we use the function, we will be given a key on the Azure portal that is going to allow us to make a request to this Azure function. We can define anonymous, which of course at the name same suggests anyone will be able to call it. Be very careful with this option in a production workload, of course. Or you can use admin system or user configuration if you want to leverage to the RBAC to set up the authentication. For now, let's use the anonymous one to make it things pretty simple. And we also need to specify one or more of these HTTP events that we would like to take advantage from. And as part of the HTTP trigger, we receive an HTTP request, which is going to contain the request that is going to travel throughout the request when we invoke this Azure function. Besides that, as you can see, there is nothing like a very complicated or too fancy here. This is just a public class with the definition of it, and the important piece is going to be always this piece. If you remember from the previous video, we spoke about the host JSON. This is another option to set up your Azure function. You can define here the trigger and the inputs that you would like to have as part of the Azure function. But usually you only need to do one of the two, using the programming language as you see right now on the screen, or using the host JSON. In this case, since we are using .NET and not an scripting option in this case, it is far way better if we take advantage of the programming language, which is .NET and C# in this case. Okay, so let's see how we can execute this function locally and make everything work. So let's go back into the console. So in order to execute this function locally, we can use the func operator just to start it. So func start, and in a few seconds this is going to trigger the Azure function. Okay, so as you can see, we have the HTTP function in the function definition at the bottom of the console. So it says that we have a localhost 7071. We have an HTTP function running in there, and it supports the get and the post method. If we had more functions in here, all of them will be displayed all together in this console too. So let's go into the browser and let's take a look into the localhost 7071. And we can see we have the Azure function basic already running in here. But in order to make a request to the client, we need to use the API and also the name of the Azure function that we would like to call. In this case, we say the name of our Azure function is HTTP function. So as you can see, we get the welcome to Azure, and if we take a look into the code, this is exactly what our function is doing when we are making a very simple request. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to need the container, add a new function, and start the function locally. So let's take a look what we need in order to deploy the Azure function into the Azure portal. So in order to deploy the Azure function into the Azure side, we need to comply with a basic requirement first in order to make it work. Every Azure function app that you deploy into the Azure portal is going to require you to create a storage account first. This storage account is used mostly by the web job configuration on the Azure side to save configuration and also to make exchange between a couple of security things that the Azure function requires to. So let's start with that. For that, we are going to use the AC storage command, and in this case we will use the account create, and what we need to provide is the name of the storage account that we would like to set up, and also specify the location where we would like to have this storage account. As always, we need to say the resource group we would like to locate this storage account and the SKU. So as other Azure services, the storage account also have an SKU, and in this case we are going to be using the simple of them. And when we get to a video to speak in detail about the storage account, we will cover the different SKUs that we have available. But before doing this, let's refresh our resource group, and now let's execute this command. This will take a few seconds to create a storage account, so we will be back when that part has been completed. Okay, now that we have our storage account created and set up, we can move to the next command, which is going to be the AC function app, and we are going to be using the create command once more. So we need, of course, to provide the name of the Azure function that we would like to create. We need to specify the storage account that we would like to use with our Azure function, and in this case we will be using the consumption cloud location. In this case, it's going to be in the East US 2. So that means this Azure function is going to be using the basic consumption plan as part of the compute solution. So take a look into the previous video in case you want to learn more about the different type of plans that Azure has to offer for the Azure functions. As always, we will need to provide the resource group, and one very important parameter is the version function that you would like to use. In this case, today we'll be using the latest stable one, which is the 4. According to the programming language that you would like to use, take a look into the documentation. You might need to use 2, 3, or 4. So in this case, since we are using .NET and we have full support in the Azure side, we are going to go with the latest one. So we will be back in a moment where this process has been completed. Now that the function app has been created, let's take a look into the Azure portal just to make sure that the resource has been created. For that, we will be using the list command as part of the function app, and we are going to be querying the repository side name, which is the name of the function app that is in the Azure portal. In this case, we only have one, and as you can see, CloudWorld function has been created successfully. So let's move into the next step where we are going to be deploying the code into the Azure side, just to see exactly the same HTTP trigger deploy into the Azure portal. Now talking about the Azure portal, here we go also to the Azure portal and we locate the function app. We will see that the resource has been created, but if we take a sneak peek into the functions tab in the middle of the screen, you can see we don't have anything created yet. But also it's very important to see that we already have a function URL assigned to our function, so that's pretty good as well. So let's go back into the console and let's deploy the code to our solution. In this case, once more, we will be using the Func tooling, and we are going to be using the subcommand Azure, and we are going to be targeting a function app deployment. And the action that we are going to be using, of course, is going to be the publish one. From here, only specify the name of the Azure function that you would like to target into the Azure portal. So let's execute this command for now, and this will start the deployment. The CLI will take care for us for everything, packaging the solution and deploying the code to the Azure portal. You don't have to do anything. So we will be back in a moment when this has been completed. Okay, now that deployment has been completed after a few minutes, we can see we got an answer from the deployment side, and we got our URL for our new Azure function. But if we also go into the portal and we refresh this very quickly, we also will see that we have the HTTP function in here defined and is ready to use. So if we explore the Azure portal, we will have the capability to easily test this function in here, but also you can just get the URL in this case and copy it into the browser. So let's get the the function in this case. We don't need a key anymore because we set up the anonymous authentication in this case. And opening a new tab, if we open the URL, you can see we have the same response as the local environment. Okay, so as you can see, deploying functions to the Azure portal and building a local is actually pretty easy. So join me in the next video when we are going to work in a more advanced case scenario. We are going to be writing an Azure function that is going to be reading messages from a topic, and we are going to go back into the AKSI using the same API to send messages to this Azure function and process those messages when they arrive to the Azure function. So thank you for joining me today, and see you in the next video.